Okay,
can everybody see that okay? Yeah.
If you can go to the next slide when you're ready. Thanks, Lisa.
Brilliant. There we go.
Perfect. Okay, so this is what we're going to aim to cover in the next 2 hours. As you can see, we're going to try and pack quite a lot in. And so as a result of that, we are going to go through it at quite some pace. If we're going too fast, then obviously please do shout out. But as I say, this session is being recorded, so you will get a chance to watch it back. And as you can see at the 5th bullet point there, we'll talk quite a bit about a reopening pack during this session, and that's a whole toolkit of documents and templates that we're going to send you after this event. So anything that we refer to as being a sort of here we've got a template for you that you can use, you will receive that tomorrow once we follow up after this meeting. Okay. Right, so if you can go to my next slide, please, Lisa. Okay, so you should recall that back at the end of February, our Prime Minister announced the government's roadmap out of lockdown. And what this did is it set out a series of dates over the coming months when particular things will happen. When activities might resume, and Lisa's going to talk through those different steps and the dates that they will happen at in the next few slides. But I think it's fair to say that throughout this whole process, the government have really stressed the fact that we will only stick to those dates, stick to this roadmap out of lockdown, if 4 conditions continue to be met, and those are the things that you can see on screen. And if you watched Boris's address on Monday evening, I think it was, they spent quite some time reassuring people that these conditions do continue to be met, and that we don't have a problem at the moment where it feels like the NHS is going to be overwhelmed, or there's not a major problem with new variants, and obviously the vaccine programme has been going particularly well. So at the moment, the dates that we have for the different steps feel like they might happen on those dates, but I think it's fair to say that if for any reason any of these conditions stop being met, it does seem quite clear that the government might put a halt to taking the next step, or might even sort of throw the whole process into reverse. So that's just something to be sort of aware of as we talk about these steps out of lockdown. So Lisa's now going to go and talk you through, start to talk what's happened about so far, and then start to look a little bit ahead to the future.
Okay, thanks. So we'll start by looking back at where we've been and where we're coming up to. So until this point, community facilities could only be used, as we're all aware now, for those exempt activities, things like blood donor sessions, food bank distributions, the support groups. And now we know that elections are also forming part of that exempt activity list. At the beginning of March, when schools opened, schools were also allowed to start using your community facilities. So that was good news. And then we're moving on to the 29th of March. So a few days ago, we had everything expanded a little bit further. And we've now got a list of outdoor activities that can take place. The rule of 6 is mentioned on this slide, and we're going to leave that until a little bit later on in the presentation, where hopefully we can explain a bit more about what this means, because the government has changed the rule of 6 slightly. I think making use of your outdoor space, if you've got an outdoor space attached to your community facility, this is a really good way of introducing people back to your community facility. So if you are able to have the yoga teacher and the Pilates teacher or a boot camp or whatever doing their classes in any outside space that you have, it's going to bring in a little bit of revenue for you, hopefully, but it's also going to build the confidence of people in your community about coming back and doing their activities in your building again. Just bear with me just a second, I've got to admit somebody to the session.
I've done it, don't worry.
Oh, you've done it already, okay, sorry. So the one thing I want to say about this slide is that from the 29th of March, in preparation for reopening more fully in April and May, you are allowed in your voluntary capacity to show people around your facility. So if you do have hirers that say they want to look at your venue, they want to see your space and understand if they could, you know, set up a new group, or would it be suitable for their future wedding, it's perfectly okay for you to show them around your facility now. But obviously social distancing must be considered at all times, and face masks must be worn at all times. But it is something that you can do in terms of you know, introducing people to your facility.
Lisa, sorry, just before you go on, I've got a couple of people reporting that they can't hear anything. I just want to check if that's a more general issue, or if other people are still. Can everybody else hear? Can you? Yes, looks like everybody else can hear. So it looks like it might just be an issue with a couple of people. So you might, those people, if you're finding you can't hear, I don't know whether you've accidentally lent on something, or whether you might need to log out of the meeting and log back in again. Sometimes that will resolve it. I'm sorry, it looks like it's potentially a problem at your end though, and I'm not sure it's something we can control from here. So sorry about that. Sorry, Lisa, to interrupt.
No, it's fine. You right for me to carry on?
Yeah, please do.
Okay. So this slide kind of follows on from the point about your using your outside facilities, and how you can potentially use your toilet facilities to complement anything that's going on outside, if you see what I mean. This is a question I've been asked quite a few times, believe it or not, so I thought it was useful to include it within this presentation. You can see on the slide that the ACRE guidance is that you do not have to make your toilet facilities available. They're not public toilets in any way, but it is something that you could consider if you wanted to, you know, if you had sort of like a brownie group outside or something like that, where it would help that group if they had access to the toilets. It is something that you can do. You're not opening up your whole building, you're just giving a higher access to your toilet facilities. So would recommend that you do this on a one in, one out basis. You don't want to have queues forming, you don't want people hanging around in the building. You want to make sure that you're considering all of those pinch point areas. So talk to the hirer, get them to understand that it's a one in, one out basis in terms of the building to use the facility, and it's not open to the general public, it's just open to that group to use the facility. Ensure, of course, that there is plenty of hot water and soap available, and that you've got hand sanitizer available at the entrance and exit points as appropriate. While they are using your facility, even if it is just popping in to use the toilets, they should still wear face masks at all time. And as I said, the building is closed to the rest of the general public, so it is just about them having access to use it for the toilet. Okay. So then we're moving on to looking at what's going to happen in April. So only the activities shown over the next two slides are permitted at stage 2. So it's still quite a restricted list in terms of what can happen. You can't have activities such as, you know, the art clubs, the WI, craft groups. They're not permitted to happen until May. So as I said, it is a restricted area, but there is still possibility within this that there is an opportunity for you to hire out your facility. I would absolutely recommend that whenever you are approached by somebody to book your facility, whether it's at this stage or the next stage, check with the hiring group or the tutor to make sure that you have an understanding of if they have a governing body or an umbrella organisation that the tutors work to. Many of these organisations are laying down their own COVID protocol in order to keep tutors and people using their activities safe. So it is worth talking to them about, you know, what is your organisation saying in terms of keeping your class COVID secure, and how can we work with you on this. I'll use an example of a brownie pack. I've kind of heard through the grapevine that the brownies are being advised to stick to fairly small groups of young people, so sort of keeping it to 15 young people at a time. So if you've got a brownie group in your area, which is a larger pack, you might find that they ask for multiple slots so that they can make sure that they can accommodate all of their young people. They might need to, you know, have consecutive bookings on one evening so that they can have everybody coming along safely. So in the coming weeks, you may find that you have increased inquiries around weddings and wakes. As you'll note on this slide, restaurants and hotels aren't open at this stage. So, you know, families might be looking to you, albeit a small gathering, they might be looking to the village hall to accommodate that activity. So, you know, just be warned that you could see an increase in that area. We've heard recently there was new guidance issued on the 25th of February around wedding receptions. So up to 15 people are permitted to an outdoor wedding reception, and that is with a sit-down meal only. So keeping it COVID secure at all stages, and there is clearly no dancing at this stage. So quite a restrictive, you know, wedding reception it would be. But there is still that opportunity. If you've got space for a marquee, you can have a marquee outside. Two sides, it can only be a two-sided marquee, so you have air obviously flowing through. But there is that opportunity if you can accommodate that at your facility. In terms of children's parties, it's been confirmed that you can have a maximum of 15 adults held at an indoor children's party in a community hall as of the 12th of April, so at this stage. If you have a children's entertainer or someone similar who, you know, there to keep the children occupied, a magician or whatever, or a clown, that person would be counted as one of the 15 adults. So you just need to be really careful with the hire on that to make sure that they fully understand the head count. And obviously all of the COVID guidelines would be in place. I appear to have gone off screen.
There's some problems with your volume as well, Lisa. You're not very loud for it.
Okay, I don't know quite what's happened to it. It was working perfectly okay yesterday, wasn't it? This morning.
Yeah.
Let me stop sharing and I'll come back into it.
That's okay. I'm answering some of the questions that are coming in on chat at the moment. So you said just take a moment. I'll try and keep those coming in.
Bear with me 2 seconds and see if that resolves it. Can everybody hear me okay now? Yeah?
Yeah, that seems okay. Thanks.
Right.
Yes, sorry, Maggie, you've just asked a question about number of adults who can attend a children's party. So yes, from indoors from the 12th of April, it's a maximum of 50 adults can attend a children's party. But again, you know, they need to think about social distancing. It's not a free-for-all.
Sorry, my thing's gone completely nuts now.
And the 15, this was for an inside party.
It is, yeah. So from the 12th of April, yes, that's right. Okay. Yeah. With regards to the preschool, I don't know of any reason why you could not have other activities, obviously other children's activities from the 12th of April, Claire. You've asked the question about if you're hosting a preschool, is that all you can do, or can you also be open for other children's activities? Yes, you can, but yeah, you would obviously need to obviously think carefully about the cleaning, etc. there.
Yeah, it's all a midweek, so it's preschooler in every day, and then scouting are in following them literally afterwards. So it's just about what guidance there kind of is about, if there is any guidance around the cleaning and things in between. Because
we'll obviously come on to, we're going to come on to cleaning shortly. Okay. Lisa, just to say, we're seeing your notes view rather than, I don't know why it's gone a bit nuts. So I'll carry on answering. I'll carry on answering questions in the meantime.
Questions, and I'll try and resolve.
Yeah, there's no limit on the number of children that we've been advised about at the moment. So you know, but again, you might as a trustee committee, you might want to think about numbers, obviously yourselves, about what you feel is manageable. So just to be that. And somebody has asked a question, Sue asked a question about can children's activities include exercise? And I believe that is the case. I think it's any children's activities is absolutely fine. Martial arts for children, yes, is permitted now. Yeah.
It was just strange that on the list of children's activities, they didn't mention anything that was any form of exercise.
No, it's again, one of the things we're going to come on to is we've got a list of all the activities that can take place, we've sort of as an ACAN network, we've thought about all the different activities that take place in village halls, and we've compiled a sort of a document that shows which step those activities can take place at. And I say we'll cover that off a little bit later, but just to say you will all be getting a copy of that, which I think will help. So if you're considering which bookings you can take and which you can't, then you'll be able to see which step they're permitted at. Right, looks like Lisa's got the tech doing what it should be doing. So
you hear me now.
we can hear you. Yeah. So you carry on.
It went like a dream this morning, didn't it? Anyway, my last point on this slide is around the parent and toddler groups. And again, this is reflecting on the 15 adult point. So if you've got a maximum of 15 adults attending your parent and toddler group, you would do a head count on the adults and not on the children. So as an example, you might have a mother coming along who's got a 2-year-old and a baby in arms. You wouldn't count the children, you just count the adults. So a maximum of 15, where it refers to a maximum of 15 for a parent and toddler group, you count the parent and not the children. Okay. Really important to remember that at this point, indoor activities that are bringing people together, even if they do not mix with other households, if you're getting inquiries around this, that can't happen until step 3. So you need to be really careful about, yes, children's activities can take place at step 2. But you need to think about all of the activities you've got that are going to fall into step 3 after the 17th of May. And as Alison's already said, we've got this table, which will make that, I think, much clearer for you in terms of what falls into what steps that you can then apply to your own circumstances at your facility. So it'd be really worthwhile spending some time looking at that when you've received your pack from us. So the other point around this is not to forget that, having said all of that, don't forget about the fact that if you had support groups meeting at your hall, anything that fell onto that original exempt list can still take place. So if you did have support groups meeting at your facility, that is okay at this stage because it was already an exempt activity. So this is a kind of a case of you're at each stage adding to it rather than taking away. Right, so at this point, don't forget that all of the social contact rules will continue to apply. So meaning that all social distancing must be maintained. No indoor mixing is allowed between different households at this stage. And if you intend to hold an outdoor event such as a car boot sale, if you've got that sort of, if you've got that sort of external space that you could do a car boot sale or an outdoor market, what we're suggesting is that you check with your local authority that you don't need to do any, you don't need any additional licenses to cover these activities at this time. The local authorities, as we understand it, are being issued further guidance from government on how to run and manage outdoor events under the COVID situation. So really, if in doubt, go to your local authority and check with them to make sure that you are working within those guidelines for your particular district. We've been asked several times over the last few weeks about exercise groups, and can exercise groups meet outside after the 12th of April? The short answer to that is yes, they can. you know, using your external space is going to be of real benefit at this stage. And you just have to remember that it's about adhering to the government mantra about hand space and space principles. So anybody hiring that space must make sure that they are keeping their activity as COVID secure in the external area, and applying the rules we spoke about the toilet facilities if you're allowing them to use your facilities. If they are using your facilities, again, it's about making sure that they are, those facilities are being cleaned on a regular basis. Don't forget that as well, even if it's just the toilet area. Libraries will be able to open again from the 12th of April. So again, if you've got a mini library within your facility, or a book drop, or a book exchange, you can reopen again for something like that. And also, if you've got anything which falls into the retail category, in terms of markets, craft fairs, all of these things can take place, providing you can ensure that it is a COVID secure environment and that face masks are being worn. Okay, so back to Alison.
Okay, so as I say, Lisa's talked us through the first two steps. So what's already happened, and then what's going to be what can happen from the 12th of April. There's obviously two further steps, step 3 and 4, that we're going to come on to shortly. But I thought before we did that, there's some sort of fundamental things that it'd be quite helpful for you to understand when you're thinking about reopening, because obviously some of you now will be thinking about what bookings you can accept from the 12th of April. And then obviously what bookings you might accept at a later date. But there's some of these sort of new rules that have been introduced with the latest government guidance. I think it'd be good if we just run through those now, so that you understand those things, you have those in mind as we move on to the next steps, because I think, you know, there may well be questions that get thrown up by them. So we're going to talk through these each in turn. We're going to tackle what's probably the most complicated one first, and that's understanding the rule of 6. And Lisa's going to kick this off next. I won't lie, it is a little bit complicated. We'll go through it slowly, hopefully so that so that you understand it. When we did this session with a group this morning, it's probably the thing that caused the most questions. So please do shout. You won't be the first if it does provoke any questions. So I'll let Lisa kick off.
All right, thank you. Okay, so as I said earlier, the rule of 6 has been updated slightly. So it now is the rule of 6 or 2 households coming together. And those 2 households coming together may build a group which is bigger than 6. So I can think of lots of opportunities that this is going to cause confusion in terms of when you're hiring out your facility and trying to work out the seating arrangements and everything. Be assured that management committees, you as a management committee, you're responsible for ensuring that the room is set up to provide the seating that's required. And so you would set it out in line with the rule of 6 guidance. It's not for you as trustees and volunteers or the event organisers to manage individuals' behaviour or to challenge any group during an event. Equally, the organisers of activities.
Very boring. Very boring.
Equally, organisers of activities are not required to inquire about household arrangements or to challenge groups of people that are arriving together. So even if you see a larger group coming and they claim to be 2 households, you're not to challenge that, you're to take it on their word that they are 2 households that are presenting. What you need to try and avoid, the government are using the phrasing mingling. So what you want to try and avoid is that the groups of 6 are mingling. So when you're allotted a group of 6, you need to sit in that group of 6 and stick with it, and not interchange your groups of 6. So once you've arrived and been seated in your area, you would stick to that area, and what you need to do is try and avoid people wandering around and mingling with other tables and other groups of people at any event. So it's making it clear to the hirers and people attending the event that the rule of 6 is in place. Having that conversation with hirers, I think, is going to be absolutely essential, and thinking about the booking of events. Is it going to make it easier for people to book in advance for their events so that the rule of 6 seating is managed? So you have a good idea in advance of how many people will be attending, obviously because you'll have to do it within your COVID capacity rules, but also making sure that you've got sufficient amount of tables, for example, set out, and that you can accommodate family groupings that are coming along as well. I've got a couple of examples that I tend to use when I talk to people about the rule of 6. So just because quite often people say to me, oh, does that mean only 6 people can turn up to an event? And it doesn't. It just means about people who are turning up to an event, making sure it's sticking within your COVID capacity, and that they are forming a group of 6 and not just 6 people to an event. So let me use a yoga session as an example, or a Pilates session as an example. Everybody turning up would turn up as an individual. So they would turn up, be socially distanced throughout that process of turning up, arriving at their allotted space, setting their mat out. They would remove their mask to take part in the activity, but if they want to leave their mat or go to the toilet for any reason, they would put their mask back on again. When they leave the building, they would obviously pack their equipment up and put their face mask on and leave the building. So everybody arrives as an individual, everybody leaves as an individual, and you're all socially distancing from each other and making sure that there is no close contact. Tutors in those types of classes now are no longer allowed to make personal adjustments on people. They're not allowed to touch anybody to help them. So even the tutor must socially distance from their class. On occasions, you might be in a position where you have a couple of friends will come along. Well, clearly they've probably shared a car to come over. They're in a group, their group setting, so they could sit together, they could chat together. There isn't a problem around that. So, but generally, people come along to those classes as individuals, don't they? The other example I think might be useful to use just to kind of get you thinking about the rule of 6 and how that might play out in your own facilities is the kind of the traditional coffee morning example. And if you think that within your COVID capacity, you could probably accommodate 20-25 people at your building, and you know, you can assume that from that you probably need 5 or 6 tables set out with 6 people around it to form the groups of 6. You might also want to consider that not everybody wants to sit on a big table, so it might be that you want to do a combination of tables, some larger, some smaller, so that that everybody feels comfortable. Everybody would arrive in a socially distanced manner, so what you don't want is a whole cluster of people queuing at the door together. So making sure that there's a gentle flow of people arriving, so stagger the times if possible. They get allocated a table. Once they're at their table, they would be seated there, and they wouldn't necessarily leave that table until the end of the event. So food and drink would be served to the table, and you would want people to avoid wandering around and chit-chatting with other tables. So it is about being clear with people that they're forming that group, but not mingling with the rest of the room. To prevent them.
Lisa, are we still talking about from the 12th of April, or have you moved on?
So the rule of 6 would apply, the principles of the rule of 6 will apply. So for the 12th of April, that's about outdoor, forming a group of 6,
yeah,
or 2 households. And then when we come on to the 17th of May, it would then be indoor activities. So what I'm trying to do is give some examples, but the rule of 6 principles, as far as we know at this stage, aren't going to change. what I thought might be helpful if I gave some inside examples as you start to organise your activities. So as I said, refreshments will be served at the table. You need to consider how how you manage people in terms of, do you have enough volunteers in order to do that table service? Do people book for their food in advance? Things like that. So it might take additional planning to get your event up and running. Another useful tip is when you're doing the kind of the traditional quiz night scenario, is reminding people that they should bring their own pens and paper. So avoiding that sharing. What you don't want is people exchanging their answers around the room to be marked. People are just going to have to mark their own answers, and you keep your own pen and you have your own piece of paper. So it's keeping that exchange to a minimum. To sum up, this is a complex area. But what you're trying to avoid is the mixing and the mingling of people in large groups. So you need to try and keep it to a group of 6 or 2 households coming together. And it might help to think of it in terms of what you would do if you visited the pubs or restaurants. It's that same sort of principle in terms of the seating arrangements. Try and keep it so that people, are that the tables are 2 meters apart. So plenty of space in the room, and all of your other COVID regulations would apply in terms of good ventilation. So it is a complex area, and as I said, we've got time for questions afterwards, so we can talk through any of these areas if it wasn't clear. Okay, so I think it's over to Alison now.
Yeah, I was just going to talk briefly because I know a lot of community buildings are used for parish council meetings. In fact, some are run by parish councils, so obviously are using their buildings for their meetings. You probably are aware that the government passed emergency legislation allowing local authority meetings to be held online for the immediate duration of the pandemic. But that legislation is due to time out on the 7th of May, and the government have made it clear that they don't plan on extending that. So after that date, local councils, parish and town councils will need to go back to holding face-to-face meetings. But obviously, because of the need to hold those indoors, we're going to have to wait for step 3, which is likely to be, at the moment, is the 17th of May. So long as those conditions continue to be met, step 3 will take place from the 17th of May. And therefore, what we're suggesting is that local councils, obviously, if they got to hold a meeting in May, need to hold it after the 17th, when obviously there's likely to be less restrictions around indoor activities. The other thing to mention is annual parish meetings, which in most parishes are actually organised by the local council, and that's when the council sort of reports back to the public, and it obviously receives information from other local groups. So, for example, sometimes the village hall is invited to give a report to the annual parish meeting, and these should also be held after step 3 comes into place, or hopefully on the 17th of May. But there is a deadline for those annual parish meetings each year. They have to be held under the Local Government Act. It says they must be held by the 1st of June. So there's a short window sort of between when hopefully we can start holding general indoor activities on the 17th of May, and then obviously the deadline for those meetings taking place, which is the 1st of June. So that was just to make you aware of that. I guess the other thing to mention when we're talking about parish councils is there's a lot of elections coming up on the 6th of May, and some of your buildings may well be used as polling stations. I hope that the people who are running those elections, the local council, local district councils, etc., have had conversations with you about that. They almost certainly will have done, judging from some of the feedback we had at this morning's session. But the body running the election is responsible for all the risk assessments for that, and they will undoubtedly eventually come. There's been a lot of guidance issued by government on how those local elections need to be held, and they will undoubtedly be equipped with all the equipment they need, and all the things they need to sort of protect people coming to your facility to cast their votes. So you know, if you are in that situation, please do speak to your district council about that. Okay, I think we're going to come on to trustee meetings next, Lisa. I think I've seen some questions flash up in the chat, so do you want me just to take those before we
Yeah.
If you have a council size which goes over the room space restrictions when seated, can you still meet online, or what do you do? Well, government is clear that local councils must go back to meeting in person. So I think, no, they can't still meet online, because I don't think that's allowed under local government law anymore from the 7th of May. It may be that you need to find an alternative venue. We haven't obviously covered off COVID secure capacities yet, but I suspect, I'm just trying to think, we have got a few bigger parish councils in this county. Let's talk about that when we look at COVID secure capacity, Claire. If you still got a concern, then we can always take a question away, and we can always put it to NAUC or someone like that, and see what they say about that. And then, do parish councils need to be sat in groups of 6 once they return? Yes, so yeah, they will have to obviously either they can sit individually at 2 meters social distance. So we'll come on to how people should be seated in meetings, but essentially it's side by side as opposed to facing each other, and ensuring sort of 2 meters between people. So that's one way of doing it. Or I guess the other way would be to stick with your rule of 6 and make you know, you would have people sat in a couple of groups of 6. I guess that's feasible as well. But I would suggest for most parish council meetings, it's probably going to be easier just to seat people at 2 meters social distance between them, and ensure that people aren't breathing directly opposite each other, that kind of thing, and obviously keeping face coverings on. So parish council meetings are open to the public. Presumably we have to turn public away if capacity is reached. Again, yeah, I think that's a difficult one, because obviously you do have a duty to allow public access to your meetings. Most parish councils don't tend to be inundated with members of the public unless they're discussing anything controversial. So it might well be that, you know, it just, you know, if there is a particularly controversial item, perhaps it might be better, and it's not time critical, just to delay it until all restrictions are lifted. And that may well be, you know, when we come on to look at the other remaining steps, you know, the government are currently hopeful that is going to be June. Or it may be that you could still allow the public to join the meeting by online means, by zooming in. But, you know, that does create a certain amount of problems, obviously, in terms of holding a hybrid meeting where you've got some people in person and some people logging in remotely is quite a challenge. So I'll let Lisa talk about obviously community building trustee meetings next.
Okay. So the guidance at the moment says that trustees should not come together for physical meetings until after the 17th of May, assuming that this timeline doesn't change. So I think there is differing guidance around this, in terms of it is considered in some cases that voluntary meetings could go ahead from the 12th of April onwards. But at the moment, the ACRE guidance that we're working to says the 17th of May. So I can update people if that date actually shifts at all. I'm afraid until then, it's going to be a case of still relying on your Zoom meetings, your emails and phone conversations, and, you know, just making sure that that your meeting, when you do eventually are able to meet in person, that you're applying the same COVID rules to yourselves as you apply to any of your hirers, and that you keep your meetings COVID secure. As we always say over this last year, we've always been saying, if you are meeting over Zoom, or taking telephone decisions, it's really important that you're taking a minute of any decisions, so that when you do actually end up meeting in person, you can then ratify those decisions at a proper meeting of your charity. So many of you will have already postponed your AGMs from last year. And so if you have an AGM which is due to fall before the 17th of May, obviously we would be advising you to make sure that you postpone this AGM again until after the 17th of May, and you've got the opportunity to hold that meeting in public. Again, as we were just saying about public meetings, and you might be in a position, I've not seen an AGM yet that's inundated with hundreds of people turning up, but if you are in the lucky position that you know your meeting is going to be popular, you might want to consider a booking system, so that you know in advance how many people are likely to turn up for your AGM, and you can arrange the seating accordingly in terms of individuals, couples, 2 meters apart, and all of the other considerations that you'll need to make to keep it COVID secure. Okay, so back to Alison.
Okay, so I just wanted to give you a reminder that the regulations for the collection of contact details remain in place and in force. And what these say is that every hirer using a community building must either collect individual contact details from people, or ask the participants to scan the QR code that the hall displays. So obviously, just to clarify there, as the management committee of the hall, you have a responsibility to ensure you have an NHS QR code on display. If you don't already have one, the pack that we're going to send around will give you details on how to get one of those codes, and then obviously put that on display in your hall. The responsibility for ensuring that the people who come to events at your hall either scan that or give their personal details to the person organising their activity is actually lies with the hirer. So obviously, if you do get people who perhaps haven't got a mobile phone to scan the QR code, they would have to physically give their contact details to the organizer of their event, and then that person, that hirer, has to hold on to those details for 21 days after the event to ensure there's no outbreak of COVID, because obviously if there was, they would be required to pass that those people's contact details onto NHS Test and Trace, so that they could require people to isolate, etc. So as I said, your responsibility is about providing the poster, and then obviously telling your hirers that about their obligations to ensure that people either use the QR code or provide their details. Okay. Right, okay, this is the biggie. Calculating your community building's capacity. Okay, so I think we've mentioned several times that one of the things you will need to do going forward as you begin to accept bookings again, whilst restrictions are still in place, is to understand what the COVID-19 secure capacity of your building is. And the simplest way to establish this is just to think, what is your hall's normal seating capacity? And then to say, okay, if your normal capacity is whatever it is, you can only take bookings that have up to 25% of that number attending. So as you can see in the example there, very easy one to understand. If your hall can normally seat 100 people, then under COVID secure guidelines, you need to say that you can only accept 25 people. What I will say is that's, again, there always seems to be a lot of caveats in the things we're saying, is that this gives you quite a cautious approach, because what's that's allowing, if you do that sort of 25% figure, is that's allowing you to have a 2 metre social distance between every individual attending. But as Lisa's already explained, you know, for some of the hires that you take, people won't be attending as individuals. They might be attending as couples, or they might be attending as family groups or whatever. And therefore you can potentially raise your capacity by a little. I mean, I wouldn't go mad. What I would say is that I think a 25% figure is a very prudent approach, a very cautious approach, and a very sensible approach, because if you think about what we're ultimately trying to do, we're trying to stop COVID spreading. None of us want to have to go back into another lockdown. So, you know, it makes sense to say to your hirers, I'm sorry, I'm afraid our hall's capacity is whatever your hall's capacity is. If they say, oh yeah, but our groups, you know, so say your limit is 25 and they say, but our group's got sort of 28 people come in, is that okay? Then so long as you're sure that as a hirer, they're doing all the things they need to do, and again we'll come on to a little bit more detail about what those things are, you can stretch your capacity a little bit. I mean, you know, I say don't go mad, but you know, it's a slightly elastic limit, because as I say, that 25% is a very, very prudent approach, but it's a good figure to have in mind, so that, you know, as a committee, you can feel confident that you're doing your part to stop the spread of COVID. Okay. And then I just thought it's probably just worth reiterating at this point. I talked about this table earlier, but as I say, what we've got is this sort of spreadsheet, if you like, of all the possible activities that can take place in a village hall, and then when according to government advice, those things can start to happen again. So we will circulate that to you. Hopefully then that will, you know, you'll be able to pick out the activities you're worried about or you're thinking of taking bookings for, and work out exactly when they can take place, with what numbers, etc., and any other rules that you need to abide by. So hopefully that will help when you see it.
Right, so back to me for step 3. So now we're kind of looking towards after May the 17th. And obviously we're still caveating this with if everything goes according to plan and things don't change and government guidance doesn't change. But this is the position we're at the moment. So it's very much hoped that we'll be starting on that road to being, you know, behaving a bit more normal in terms of the activities that can go on in your facility. Obviously making sure that anything that does go on, you have COVID procedures in place. I mean, this is a step where we do need to still be cautious. We're still a long way off, and things might change, and we might see the R rate increase. And at this point, you know, we shouldn't be surprised if government put the brakes on and halt it. So what we would suggest is if you're taking bookings after the 17th of May, is that you actually say to your hirers that, you know, things could change, and that at very short notice we might have to cancel your booking to take place on whatever date. So, you know, just make hirers aware of the cautious situation that we're in, and that you know, you might have to put the brakes on and go back a step. We were asked a question around controlled events, and this is kind of, it's an evolving area to say the least. The term controlled events, our interpretation at the moment of this would be that it's an event that's been organised by an official body, such as a charity or a business. There has been new guidance released very, very recently in the last couple of days by government, and they appear to now be dropping the term controlled event. So I think we'll see how that evolves over the next few weeks, but I don't think it's going to change in terms of the overriding message is about us making sure that the events are safe by staggering your arriving times and your leaving times, that you're avoiding large numbers of people coming together at a similar time. And the events that you should be most cautious about, which would fall into that category of controlled events, are things like film shows, plays, large public meetings, dinners, fetes, performances, those types of things. So they're the for controlled events, and they're the types of events that you're going to need to consider that 50% capacity as shown on the slide. So larger the event, more cautious in terms of how you're managing that.
I think it's important to say there, Lisa, that obviously what that's basically saying is that for certain events you can up your capacity, the number of people who can attend quite considerably, from 25% to 50%. But what they're saying is that the only reason you can do that is because of the amount of control that the organizer of that event takes for the amount of control the organizer has over the people who attend. So for example, it could be ticketed events where you can tell people to turn up at particular times, so you stagger their arrival, so that it might be, I don't know, for a film show, if you have an interval, you can say there may be a sort of stewarding system where somebody will take responsibility for saying, right, row 1, would you like to use the loos? Row 2, would you? It sounds quite draconian, but it will be about the hirer taking more control to ensure that people don't mingle. And obviously that can really only happen at those sort of events where you've got absolute control over who's going to turn up. Obviously a sort of a more sort of general event, I don't know, a gardening club, or I'm just trying to think of some of the other things that might happen, an indoor market, those sorts of sort of more public events. Obviously you don't have that same level of control, and therefore that's why they're saying you stick with the 25% capacity as opposed to moving to this higher level. Hopefully that explains that.
Okay.
But if you've got a 50% capacity situation, if everybody's individuals, they can't socially distance at 2 meters anyway, within the room.
But they may be able to still socially distance with 1 meter with other mitigating measures. So it's the face coverings, that kind of thing. So yeah, you might well be able to so long as it's a very controlled event where there's people ensuring that people are obeying the rules regarding face coverings, etc., only taking them off to eat or drink or whatever, then it may be that yeah, as you say, because you've got that level of control, you've got that ability to stretch your capacity a little bit.
Okay, so just moving on to the second part of the 17th of May, the rule of 6, as we've kind of said a few times throughout this, that the rule of 6 will still apply to all indoor events, and the rule of 6 at this stage will be abolished for outdoor gatherings. So it becomes restricted for indoors in terms of your rule of 6, but outdoor gatherings don't have a rule of 6 attached to them any longer. There's emerging guidance around the social contact between friends and families, and that's being reviewed at the moment. So we don't have any really firm advice on that for you at this stage. And also we've all seen in the news around the vaccine passports and this being under consideration. It's very much hoped that any vaccine passport scenario would apply to much larger venues, theatres and stadiums and things like that, and that it wouldn't impact on village halls and community buildings. But all we can say at this stage is that as soon as we have information available in terms of these changes, then we can update everybody. But it is all still a little bit of an unknown in that area. So very lastly, in terms of step 4, again, there isn't really much we can say in terms of this section at this stage, because again, it is about the unknown and how everything else is going to roll out and pan out. But it is very much hoped that we can be in a position at this stage that the social contact rules and regulations would be removed, and that larger gatherings of people will be permitted, and of course we will all be able to dance at weddings again and things like that, and life will be normal. Again, this is going to be an area that we're going to need to update everybody on as this goes on, and as we have more confirmation about how things are going on. But this is the position for the 21st of June at this stage.
Okay, so we've scheduled to have a sort of a very short break here because we realise we've sort of talked at you for about an hour. Obviously divulged quite a lot of information, and you've had to take quite a lot in. But before we take that short break, I just wondered whether anybody's got any questions that haven't been addressed through the chat that you'd like to ask. If you have, you're very welcome to wave. I can see Sue at St Mary's in Sawston. If you'd like to unmute yourself.
Thank you. I was interested in you saying that we have to have a QR poster, because in fact 2 days ago I took ours away because we're reopening for 3. Next week we're opening for children's karate, and then on the 17th of May we're opening for 3 adult exercise classes, and all those organisers will have a register of who attends with their details. But what we want to stop is odd people going into the hall, say a plumber or, I don't know, postman or somebody, and signing, using the QR poster and not signing our list so that we don't know who's been in. So are we legally obliged to keep displaying the poster? Because at the minute we've got, well, until 2 days ago, we had the QR poster and a sign-in sheet. And we really want everyone to sign in and not to use them so that we know who's been in.
I think it's about what contact details you're collecting. Obviously, you have to be collecting all the details that Test and Trace would want, and I don't know whether your sign-in does that.
Yes.
So how you know, obviously it's people's personal data, so you've got some GDPR implications there as well. So obviously the QR code is the simplest way for people to do that, and to do that, you know, whilst respecting their privacy. People who are literally just dropping, you know, the postman coming in and dropping your post off, he does not need to scan the QR code, you know, that kind of thing. It's only if people are spending obviously a period of time in your premises they would need to do that. Legally, I suspect it's a case of, so long as people are doing one or the other, that's probably okay. I guess some people might be more comfortable using the QR code, and some people less so. If you have made it an absolute obligation on your hirers that they must collect those people's personal details and maintain them for 21 days and then confidentially shred them, then I suspect you're doing what's legally required.
Okay, thank you very much.
I've got Kingston Village Hall waving at me. Hello.
Yeah, my question is, with the rule of sitting 3 feet apart or 6 feet apart, what are the mitigations? I mean, for a coffee morning, because this is going to be very crucial to how many people you can have in the hall. So,
well, your COVID secure capacity is what it is for the moment. So depending on what your usual seated capacity is, 25% of that figure will be what your absolute maximum is you can have in the hall at the moment, really.
Yes, but what you had a slide saying under certain circumstances 50% capacity applied.
That's when, so that's if you remember, we talked about this term that, as I say, seems to, not quite sure whether it's going to be in constant use, but controlled indoor events. So where you're hosting an event, or where somebody is hosting an event where they've got a little bit more control over who attends and what those people do whilst they're in your venue. So in terms of, you know, ensuring that, you know, only a certain number of people use the loos at once, or that people are being waited at their tables, for example, and not all clustering around a sort of a kitchen hatch, then yes, you could potentially go up to a 50% capacity. But I think for the majority of our activities that go on in village halls, you know, you're looking at that lower figure, because I don't think a lot of activities are probably classified as sort of those kind of performance events or conferences, that kind of thing, which is what the definition covers.
Yeah, seems a little bit of a grey area there, because if you have the same number of people coming, or roughly the same for a weekly coffee morning, and you know, they know the drill of where to sit, how to sit, when to go to the loo, etc. You know, it's quite difficult to decide which is the controlled event and which isn't, really, isn't it?
I think what I would say is, I think we need to wait for a little bit more clarity from
yes.
I mean, obviously, if you think about what's happened this time, we've just had, obviously, this week, the announcements about the 12th of April steps. So I suspect a couple of weeks before the 17th of May, Boris is going to make another announcement, hopefully saying that all these conditions continue to be met, and that 17th of May is a goer. And at that point, all the little cogs start whirring, and we get a lot more information drilled down to us, and which we can then obviously pass on to you. But it's a little bit early at this point, I think.
Yeah,
if you
understand that.
Is that okay?
Yes, fine, thanks.
Claire from Castor Village Hall.
Yeah, how would anyone deal with a preschool that has had the luxury over the last year of pretty much taking over the building, and is insisting that they can't possibly pack all their stuff away because it would be about contaminating all the things between their bubbles that they're operating in the preschool, where we can now then move and open up to other groups. So typically our preschool runs 3 full days and 2 mornings a week, and then we have other groups that have followed them later on. Then they're saying it's more about that they can't pack their stuff away without it kind of contaminating and crossing bubbles. And has anyone else kind of come across the same or got any advice on that? Because it's almost like they're now stopping what we could potentially be doing with the rollout and the opening up of everybody else.
Okay, so ultimately you should be making a decision based around the fact that all of the exempt activities still have priority. So a preschool and nursery was on that list of exempt activities. So they are still classed as priority activities. But really it's a decision for you as trustees to make in terms of whether you are saying to that group, we do require you because of our income levels. We've still got to generate an income. We're a business. We need to be here to serve the community. So we do need you to pack your kit away each day at the end of the day. Or you take that decision where you allow them to have free run of the facility until whatever date. But
yeah, I think the thing that I'm sticking out mostly is the parish council part, because the parish council also use our building. And so where do we sit with priority? Are they still a priority group after the 17th of May?
As far as I know, they're seen as the on the priority list, and the guidance says that they that continues throughout. So I don't think that element goes away, but it can't prevent other activities from happening in your facility. I think it does sound like they're being a little bit unreasonable with you.
I think they've got used to being spread out and don't like packing away. I think that's what part of it is.
If we could take away an action to just look a little bit more at preschools and those arrangements, I think then we could perhaps come back to you with a more confirmed position. I would say, obviously as trustees, your ultimate responsibility is to do the right thing for your charity, and therefore I don't think that their interests can supersede those of your charity.
No, and it's also the agreement that we have with the hall, with the people that own it, as trustees and everything, is for the purpose of all villages and no exclusive use to one group, where COVID's kind of changed that prior to now, but at some point we do need to make sure that we're following.
And also I think you're absolutely right that they do need to obviously start to get back to the mindset that they are going to have to share. It is not for their sole use, and if that means that unfortunately they have to put more effort into cleaning those things so they can be packed away and then cleaning them when they get them out again, I'm afraid that's what they're going to have to do. They can't get in the way of other groups using your hall. I don't think that's right at all, but I would like to go away and look at that in a bit more detail, if I may, and come back to you.
Thanks.
Anybody else got any questions? I can't see any. I'm just going to flick to my next screen. Oh, hello, Jenny at Hildesham. Hi.
Just a quickie. Can I clarify on the 30 people for the weddings, funeral, wakes? So that's after the 17th of May, and that can be indoors. Now, obviously, if the 25% capacity of the hall doesn't accommodate 30 people, then we are at liberty to reduce that number within the hall. But can I also just check, if somebody came to us and said they wanted to hire the hall for a wedding reception, do we have to in some way prove that it is for a wedding reception? What would be to stop a family organising a party for a 21st birthday, for instance, with 30 people? Because my understanding is that wouldn't be allowed from the 17th of May.
No, to answer your first part of your question, with regards to, so say your secure capacity is 25, but a wedding can take place for 30, that would be okay, because if you think about that kind of scenario, the people who go to a wedding in household groups.
Okay.
You don't get 30 individuals go to a wedding. It tends to be, mum, dad, kids, grannies, so it could be 4 of those 30 people are actually one household. So, you know, you start to eliminate some of those issues.
Yeah. Okay.
The question about can people book something in disguise, call it a permitted activity and run something else. Obviously your hirers are entering into a contractual arrangement with you. So I guess if they break the terms of that contract, I mean, I guess the question is, would you know about it? And what would you do if you became aware of it? Obviously, if you become aware of it whilst it's going on, then you were perfectly at liberty to call the police. I mean, I would in that situation if somebody's actually breaking the law. But yeah, chances are, I guess you wouldn't know about it until it was too late. I don't know what you think, Lisa, in that.
Yeah, no, I'd say the same actually. That you've got no way of, because you're taking it on trust that they're telling you that they're booking a wedding. If they you know break the contract, you know, you probably aren't going to have. You're not going to know, are you?
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Are there any other questions at this point? Because if there's not, we thought perhaps what we might do is just take a quick 5-minute break, just a comfort break, just in case anybody wants to sort of go and sort of refresh themselves. I'm saying 5 minutes rather than 10, just purely because I don't want to keep you longer than 8 o'clock unless we really have to. So if I can just say, just pop away for 5 minutes, just stretch your legs, get a drink, and then if you come back in 5 minutes, so that will be at 7:20. Slide for me. Okay, so hopefully that's given you a taster regarding the steps and planted some thoughts in your head about reopening. Obviously at some point we're all going to have to bite the bullet and think about reopening our doors. So what are the practical steps that you need to take before you reopen? One of the documents we're going to be sending you is what we're calling our reopening checklist. And that's got a series of very practical steps that you can start to take immediately and start thinking about what you're going to need to do to reopen. One of the things we're suggesting that you should do, if you haven't already done so, is actually have a word with your hirers. And there's a template you can use that's a little sort of questionnaire you could send around to your regular hirers. And asking them what their thinking is about returning to your venue, because it'll be good for you to understand, as Lisa says, you know, whether they're going to have to sort of run their activities in a different way, whether they're going to have to sort of, you know, perhaps run their activities twice on one evening in order to fit their people in, and also whether they're planning on coming back full stop. I mean, you know, that obviously people have got very used to in the last 12 months running their activities online or running them in different ways. And it may be that, you know, your hirers are having doubts themselves or a little bit worried about safety or about what you're going to be doing. So it's a good point to sort of start having that conversation with them. And, you know, depending on sort of obviously your volume of hirers, whether you might want to do that via a sort of a quick survey, or you might just want to, you know, pick up the phone and have a chat with them. But I think it's good to get a sense of where people are at. Other things that you need to be thinking about now are things like, you know, letting your insurance company know about reopening, just to ensure they've got no special terms they need you to follow, nothing they expect you to have done in terms of reopening. Also think about the things that might have lapsed a little bit whilst obviously you've been, you know, for a lot of halls closed for much of the last 12 months. Are there things like your fire safety risk assessment, you know, was that overlooked because obviously you were closed, so it didn't need doing? Other routine health and safety assessments. A lot of village halls we know have taken the opportunity to have some work done on their halls whilst they've been closed, and some of that may well affect some of those risk assessments. So this is a good time to pull those documents out, check them, make sure they're still accurate and suitable for the premises that you're now going to be running. Just a little note there about Legionella. It is something just to be aware of. We're going to send you some information about that, but there's some little practical steps you can take, like flushing your systems through to ensure that any risks from Legionella are minimised. If you have staff, you might want to have a conversation with them about reopening. It may well be they have some concerns, particularly if they're quite vulnerable themselves. You know, if you have cleaners or caretakers who perhaps have you know, not been shielding or things like that, you know, you need to start having those conversations with them about reopening, just to understand their perspective. And then the most important thing that really you need to do is to ensure that your building meets COVID-19 secure guidelines. And we're going to come on and explain what those are to you now. If you could just move on to the next slide, Lisa. Okay, so the COVID secure guidelines, there's 6 key points that you need to think about here in order to ensure your premises is COVID secure. The first of those is making sure you've got a COVID-19 risk assessment in place. And then there's some others which are about how you manage, how you stop people who are unwell, obviously transmitting the virus within your premises. There's things around hygiene, that's in terms of cleaning hands and good respiratory hygiene. And obviously things like how you clean your premises and this need to maintain social distancing. And if you can meet all those guidelines, there's a certificate, a sort of a poster you can display in your your entrance hall. And what that will do is it will provide some reassurance to people entering your building that you've taken all the steps that you can as a committee to ensure that your premises are COVID-19 secure. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about each of those steps in a little bit more detail, just to run you through what you need to consider under each one. So I'm going to talk about undertaking your COVID-19 risk assessment. We have previously, if you think back sort of summer last year when we were looking at reopening for the first time, we did provide a risk assessment template that you could adapt and use for your premises. So if you did undertake a COVID-19 risk assessment at that point, you need to drag it out the drawer and review it. And what I would also say is if you could review it against the new template we're going to circulate, because obviously the new template talks about the rule of 6 and 2 households. So obviously some of the things, some of the terminology might well have changed from that first one that you did. If you haven't undertaken a risk assessment before, it's quite a straightforward process. The template hopefully is one that you can adapt for your own premises, but you just need to think through all the different issues, the safety issues, compliance issues, management issues, and think about what the hazards might be, who might be affected, and then what you can do to guard against those risks actually happening. And it's really sort of just some practical stuff. I mean, risk assessments can sound a bit daunting, but actually, this is about really practical issues about, how are you going to manage people using the kitchen in your facility? How are you going to ensure that, there aren't queues for toilet facilities? I mean, somebody mentioned a good trick earlier, which was just to make their accessible toilet facilities available to people. And obviously that's just a one toilet cubicle, and obviously that means managing one in, one out becomes very, very simple. You don't have to worry about how you're going to manage obviously people congregating in loos, things like that. So hopefully, as I say, the template is quite straightforward to use, but it really is just thinking and applying it to your activity. Don't just blindly say, just stick your name at the top of it and say, well, that's our risk assessment. Really think through how it applies to your facility. You are welcome, obviously, to delegate responsibility for completing it to one person, but really you must remember that as a management committee, you're collectively responsible for ensuring that risk assessment is accurate. So it's a good practice for you all to sit down and look at it together, perhaps once it's written, and ensure that nobody else spots anything that's perhaps been missed. And the other key thing there is if you do have staff, even if they're obviously volunteers, is you should consult with them on that risk assessment, because they're likely to be some of the people who are most affected by some of the risks, and therefore do invite them to think about that with you. And then obviously once you've actually signed off your risk assessment, it's important that you then share that with your hirers, because what you need them to do is to understand the precautions that you're taking, but also for them to understand the precautions that as a result you're going to require them to take. And one of the things that we do advise is that it would be a good idea, it's not absolutely compulsory, but it would be a good idea to require your hirers to also undertake a risk assessment of their own activities, how they're going to deliver those activities within your building. Think, taking into account any peculiarities that your building has, sort of narrow corridors or things like that. How is delivering their activity going to work in your building? And if they can then supply you with a copy of their risk assessment for their activity, then equally that provides you with some reassurance that they're taking this seriously, that they're a good hirer in terms of, you want people who are going to be responsible. At the end of the day, you put a lot of work into keeping your hall going. You're putting a lot of work into ensuring it's COVID secure. You want to ensure your hirers have that same sense of responsibility and accountability. But again, there is a template we will provide that you can share with your hirers and ask them to complete, so that they start to get into the mindset about thinking about risk assessments too. I think the next one is Lisa.
Okay. So this one is focusing really around what to do if somebody is taken ill at your facility. So one of the things that you must do is display a poster at your entrance, so that you're making people aware that if someone is feeling unwell, then they really shouldn't enter your premises. So trying to keep people, away at that point, rather than having somebody falling ill within your building. When somebody is taken ill at your facility, there used to be guidance previously about having a separate room and an isolation room that you would put somebody in until they could be removed by ambulance or collected if necessary by somebody. That's not quite so essential any longer. What they're saying now is that if you have a space that people can be removed to, that's great. So it could be an office space, or it could be a small meeting room space, but you don't have to keep somewhere specifically set aside for people who are taken ill at your facility. It's really important to make sure that if somebody is taken ill, that there is a thorough deep clean of your building after the event. And I would absolutely recommend that you have the disposable PPE and bin bags and everything ready in stock, just in case it happens. You don't want to leave it until you find yourselves in that position, then you don't have the kit for people to use in order to do that clean. So there is a government website which sets out how cleaning of a non-healthcare setting should take place, and we can provide that information to you. The key thing to remember is that if you are in that position and you do a deep clean of your facility, any materials that you use must be bagged. So the old rubber gloves, the old cleaning cloths, everything must be bagged and kept for 72 hours in a secure place. It's considered that after the 72 hours that the virus is no longer active, and then those items can then be placed into your normal waste disposal to get rid of them. But you do need to store that before disposal for the 72 hours. So absolutely recommend that that you discuss the procedure as a management committee. Make sure that everybody is really clear of what people need to do should the situation arise, and make sure your hirer is aware of what to do if a situation arises, especially if you're in a position where your building doesn't have staff, and and you don't have somebody in the building all the time when the building is being hired out. It's really important that you get that message across to the hirers on what they should do if somebody is taken ill, where they should take them, and then that the building would be closed and your cleaning procedure would then take place. So make sure trustees, volunteers, staff, hirers, everybody is aware of your procedures. So just moving on and thinking about a little bit more in terms of the cleaning aspect, you could display reminders, or should display reminders, should I say, regarding the hand washing and good hygiene. There's plenty of examples available from the government website, and we do have examples to pass on to you in the resources pack. And these will certainly be required until at least the 21st of June. After that, I mean, we're already hearing they're talking about that there might be, another wave in the winter, and that face masks aren't going away. So you know, there very much is I think a need to ensure that these reminders are there as a you know, a constant reminder for people using your facility that good hygiene is absolutely essential with the, you know, the hand washing. So keeping them up in your toilet facilities and your kitchen areas is probably something that you know, you should do on a permanent basis. Looking at the again, more cleaning in terms of the frequently touched areas, I'm often asked about what products people should use, and you know, it is stressed that normal supermarket products are perfectly okay. Look for ones that, you know, kill 99% of viruses and bacteria, and I think some of them are even advertising, you know, even kills COVID kind of message now. Make sure that you check the packaging to make sure that, that it is suitable for the areas that you're going to use it in your building, so that the products are suitable for the job. I think by using supermarket products, your hirers are going to be more familiar with them as well if you're asking the hirers to carry out the clean, rather than, you know, if you don't have cleaners coming in before and after every session and you're asking the hirer to do that, they will be familiar with those products rather than having commercial cleaning, professional cleaning products for people to use. If you do have cleaning staff at your facility, you could always display a poster which says, you know, the last time a full clean of the building took place. So anyone using the facility, it gives them confidence that they're coming into a cleaned environment. But if you don't have the luxury of having you know, a cleaner, you know, a cleaner on site, then, you know, it is absolutely acceptable to have the hirer doing the clean before and after, and then making arrangements for either, you know, a professional cleaner to come in on a weekly basis, or you've got volunteers coming in to do a more thorough clean in terms of, you know, floors and the kitchen equipment. Okay. So as I said, it's perfectly okay to discharge that to that responsibility to hirers, but just some points for you to think about in terms of the conversation that you'll want to have with hirers about doing that work. You really need to inform the hirer to clean the surfaces such as tabletops and sinks, you know, before and after the session. I would set out a really clear, you know, you could have a checklist or something which clearly describes to people what you expect them to do, because I think if you're asking someone to come into your building, it might not be obvious to them what your expectations are. So setting it down so that they've got an easy checklist that they can go through before and after their session, I think would be really helpful for them. When you're looking at that, you know, more sensitive items, I'm kind of thinking of electrical equipment and light switches and stuff. Don't assume that people know what to do in terms of cleaning them. You know, make sure that you write down instructions in terms of, you know, don't spray the light switch, spray the cloth, wipe the light switch over. The last thing you want is you know, electrical hazards in your building. So think through clearly in terms of, you know, the areas that might be cautious and that they're going to need additional advice on. Don't make any assumptions that people already know. It can be worrying for trustees who don't have cleaning staff to keep the facility clean, but you know, it is perfectly okay. I think for the reason ACRE have always suggested about having the clean before and after is to make sure that people have that confidence that they're cleaning the building when they come in for them to use, but then also cleaning it afterwards to leave it in a clean state for the next people to come in. So I know this when we had these sessions before, and it was of great concern to trustees in terms of, you know, was it appropriate that people were cleaning for themselves, cleaning the facility for themselves, and you know, lots of questions are asked around that. But I think we're moving to a place now where it is practical And you just need to make sure that your booking secretary is allowing sufficient time for your hirer to do that clean, have their session, do the clean at the end before the next people come in. So it is additional planning, but I think it should work quite adequately, really. One of the things that we're really, stressing to people is the importance of, if you've got a busy facility, check the sanitizer and the cleaning materials on a regular basis, probably on a daily basis if you've got people coming in a kind of a back-to-back fashion. You want to make sure that they are, that there's plenty of sanitizer, there's plenty of cleaning equipment, cleaning liquids available for people to use. And the other area that you might want to consider is that groups quite often store stuff at your facility. We've already talked about the play group and them storing their equipment at a facility. It's really, you need to be very clear with people who are either bringing their stuff back or, getting their stuff out of storage again, that, it does need to be cleaned after use. It does need to be packed away carefully, and you need to be very careful about cross-contamination between groups' items. So it might be something that you need to review with groups in terms of how much they're storing in your building, how they're storing it, where they're storing it, and it might be a conversation to say to them about they maybe need to reduce the amount of stuff that they're storing in your facility. Storage is always, it's the other contentious area, isn't it? Storage. And I've already mentioned, just reiterate again the importance of your booking secretary allowing that additional time, but to make sure that people do have the time to clean the facility, but also to be able to leave the car park and leave the building, leave the car park before the other people arrive. What you don't want to find is that you've got two groups, crossing, and you're going to end up with, lots of people in corridors and all sorts of things. So it's allow that additional time. Think through the whole COVID secure and capacity issues in that exchange of groups. So just some key points here around the social distancing aspect. With catering, arrangements obviously will depend on the size and the nature of any activity that's going on, and also the size of the facility and the kitchen you have. And we all know that no village hall is like another village hall. They all come in different shapes and sizes. So very much a common sense approach needs to be applied to social distancing in these areas, and clearly, face masks should be worn at all time in kitchen areas. In fact, as we start to go back, we start having meetings indoors again, you might come to the conclusion that actually having the kitchen open for a short meeting isn't a practical option, because it's just more additional cleaning for either your staff or the hirers. So you might want to say to a small meeting, encourage them to bring their own bottle of water or a flask of tea or whatever refreshments that they have, to bring it with them, rather than have the kitchen open and then need a complete clean through for a short meeting. For longer events, you might find that it's perfectly okay for them to have access to the kitchen, and that they do have time to clean it down, especially if it's a bigger group and they've got more volunteers that they can manage that. It's remembering all of the key areas, not just the work surfaces, but instructing them to wipe the kettle down, wipe the taps down, wipe the door handles down. So again, think about having a checklist, a reminder of people so that they don't forget any of those key areas, like the kettle or the hot water boiler, and also make them aware of these things being hot, and care needs to be taken when you're asking people to clean these types of items. I would also recommend that you ask groups who are booking, hirers who are booking, to bring their own tea towels with them. Nothing harbours germs more than a tea towel, does it? So either have paper, a roll of paper tissue available for people to use, or ask them to bring their own tea towel Where refreshments can be served from a hatch, many village halls have a hatch as their main serving point for organisations such as the WI or a coffee morning sort of scenario. Up until step 4, we're very much looking at seated arrangements, so people will have their food delivered to them. So you might want to consider, rather than finding yourself with people queuing at a hatch and being able to accommodate the social distancing within a queue, you might want to consider pre-ordering of food so that people can, collect a tray for a table, or that food can be delivered on a tray to the table. Anything that kind of makes it more easy for you in order to plan, but minimise that movement around the room. So you might want to give consideration to how you're and talk to your hirers about how they might manage those situations around the kitchen and food. So we thought we'd probably break for a discussion at this stage if there were any questions. What we did with the bookings was we asked people for their questions ahead of the session so that we could incorporate the answers, hopefully, within the session itself. So hopefully these are some of the questions that people have asked, and we've done our very best to make sure that we've included all of the questions as we've gone along. But if there are any others, I don't know if anybody has any questions they want to ask at this stage.
There's one just been posted to the chat, Lisa, from Angela at Comberton, that just says, if a group follows quite quickly after, for example, a children's dance class, should there be a gap of time? And if one of the children goes down with COVID, will that affect the following group regarding track and trace? I think my thoughts on that would be, obviously there should be sufficient time between one activity finishing and another activity starting for the clean to have taken place, regardless of who's doing that, whether that's the exiting group, a member of staff, and obviously the new group arriving, obviously, depending on what requirements you've put onto your hirers regarding doing cleaning. And obviously part of that cleaning process should be around ventilation as well. So I would say that, so obviously, so long as there's obviously is that gap to allow that cleaning and ventilation to take place, then I don't really think there's an issue. I don't think the virus is going to sort of, be lingering, particularly in the air, so long as I say the surfaces have been cleaned and the place has been ventilated. I'm not quite sure with test and trace, because obviously the way it works is that once you've scanned a QR code, you're considered to be logged into that place until you scan another QR code. So I guess potentially it would record people from both activities as being in that place at the same time, potentially. So I'm not quite sure how that works. Lisa, have you got any further insight on that?
My understanding is the same as yours. It lasts, I think it lasts until midnight or something. So if you see it at a village hall, it would then last until midnight. So I'm not sure how sophisticated it would be if somebody was triggered, but then you wouldn't have their result on that day anyway, would you? So if somebody was to come down with COVID and they'd visited the hall, you probably wouldn't find out for 24, 48 hours that that's happened, would you? So there would be always that lag.
Yeah.
So I don't know is the answer on that one.
I suspect it's just going to have to be something that we have to learn to live with, is that, sooner or later you may end up being flagged as having been in a place where there's been an outbreak of COVID, and you're then obviously told that you need to isolate for 10 days to be on the safe side, and I suspect if this isn't something that's going to go away, we are going to have to learn to live with it, and it will happen at some point, probably to all of us, but probably better to be safe than sorry. If there's any risk of you having been exposed to the virus, you want to know that you're keeping yourself, you're aware of it, so that you know that you can watch out for symptoms, but equally you want to ensure that you then don't put anybody else at risk. If you're a carer for somebody, or you want to have that knowledge so that you can take sensible precautions. So yeah, that would be my view. Are there any other questions if people want to wave before we move on to the last few slides? I can't see anybody waving on that page at me. I shall flick onto the other page. Nobody's waving on that page either.
Okay.
I don't know whether that means we've baffled you all with too much information, or whether Lisa's done such a stupendous job of explaining it all that you're all entirely there. It's a thumbs up from Mike. Thanks, Mike. Okay, in which case then I think we'll just move on to the last couple of slides then. Thought it was worth just mentioning hire agreements. As you know, as Cambridgeshire Acre, we always recommend that you use the Acre Model Hire Agreement, which is a legal document that's been signed off by the Acre solicitor, that then obviously forms the contract between you and your hirers. I suspect some of you are using that document. Some of you probably have got your own hire agreements that you use, and that's fine, so long as you're confident they're doing the job. If anybody would wish to see the Acre Model Hire Agreement, then obviously that can be arranged. The other thing that I would then say is that what's now being advised is that you should be asking your hirers to sign up to some additional COVID-19 specific conditions. And the purpose of those conditions is so that you can set out very clearly what you expect them as hirers to do to ensure your building remains COVID secure. And obviously by signing those, they are then committing, so you have got their assurance as a hirer that they will abide by those conditions. And again, that's a template that we've got prepared for you and that you will receive after this meeting. I think Lisa will probably be sending stuff tomorrow afternoon. And once you've got that, I would recommend you look at those and then you add those into your hiring agreement, or just have them as a sort of an annex to your normal hiring agreement, and that you ask all your hirers to read those, look at them, make sure they're things that you think are right for your building. There may be some bits you need to sort of just tinker with just to be specific for your building, but we would very much ask you to do that, because I think it's about protecting you as well as protecting your hirers and making it very clear to them what you're asking them to do, particularly around things like cleaning and what to do if somebody is taken ill whilst they're at one of their activities. Okay.
Is that still very similar to the one before last time, or are there major changes?
No, I don't think there's major changes. I think there might have been one or two minor bits that have been tinkered with, Mike. So yeah, just have a compare and contrast if I were you. Okay, I think we can probably skip that. I think we've covered that, Lisa, already. I've mentioned throughout that we're going to be recirculating this reopening pack to you tomorrow. So one of the things that you will get in that are the information sheet that hopefully then provides a good summary of everything that we've talked about this evening. And then you can see there's some appendices A through to M now. Gosh, they've expanded. I think to begin with, I think we had a couple of appendices. We're now at Appendix M. And those are all the different templates, etc., that we've talked about throughout this. So checklists for reopening, your risk assessment templates, your information about the QR code that you need, etc., etc. Also that table that I talked about of all the different activities and what can take place at what step. And then there's just a few extra resources that you can see on the end there, some guidance about Legionella, and then the various posters that we've referred to, things that you can just display on your walls that will help people remember to do the things that they're supposed to do in terms of, you know, catching sneezes and washing their hands properly. And I think it's good to, you know, we are going to have to keep reminding people of these things as time progresses. So you'll receive those very shortly. The other thing I wanted to just mention to you before you head off this evening is about the financial support that's available for community buildings. I know some of you, those who pay business rates, have already benefited from some of the government grant schemes that have been in place over the last 12 months. There's a new one just starting, available from the 1st of April. That was announced. Some more money that's come down from government and has been filtered via the local district councils and to businesses that pay rates. And what you can see there is that depending on your rateable value is the money that you will receive. And very clearly in the definitions attached to that guidance is that village halls, pavilions, etc. are covered. So if you are a village hall or something that pays rates, community building that pays rates, then you are eligible for that funding. I've checked on the District Council's websites this morning. Unfortunately, as ever, they are all doing something slightly different. Some of them will contact you. Some of them require you to go online and fill in an application. So as at this morning, South Cambridgeshire, Huntingdonshire and Peterborough were still saying that their scheme will be opening soon. So if you're in those districts, just keep an eye on their website pages. East Cambridgeshire, you need to go online and confirm your eligibility. And Fenland District Council say they are going to be notifying all their businesses directly themselves this week, and that grants will be paid week commencing the 12th of April. So obviously, if you think you are eligible and you don't hear anything from Fenland District Council, if you're in that area, then obviously please do contact them. Just to say, obviously, the last date for applying for that funding or receiving that funding will be the 30th of June. So it's quite a short time period now. I wanted to mention, because we've had feedback from a couple of village halls actually, that they actually feel a little bit guilty about the amount of funding they've received over the last year. In some cases, you know, it's actually exceeded what they would have received in sort of income from hiring, and people are a little bit like, oh, yeah, well, we don't really need it, you know. You know, you are a business in the broadest sense of the things. You are entitled to that money. Therefore, please do accept it and think about how you can best use it. You know, we've talked a lot about some of the additional burdens that are now going to fall on you as a management committee, and things like cleaning, or if you do need to have sort of deep cleaning done, you may feel more comfortable employing somebody to do that on your behalf. And, you know, and that's the type of thing you could use that money for. You know, you might want to tuck it away for a rainy day. You might want to invest some of it into a improvement project, but also think about some of the practical things that you're being asked to do, and whether there's anything that money can be used for that can support you in obviously keeping your village hall running properly and safely. Just the other thing to say on financial support is that I do know there are a lot of halls that don't pay business rates, and things like church halls, unfortunately, don't qualify. But all the local councils have got more funding for this additional restrictions grant that's continuing for a while longer until the end of June. So if you aren't eligible for your restart grant, then do look at your district council's website and see whether you could apply for an additional restrictions grant. Both those business grants, if you go onto your district council's webpage, there's usually a big button that talks about coronavirus. If you click on that and then look for business support, you tend to find that the details about the grants that are available under that. If you come unstuck and you can't find what you need, please come back to me or Lisa, and we'll obviously point you in the right direction. That's funding. Okay, so just a sort of final point, just to say that this course that we're running at the moment, this session that we're running is one of 4, in fact, that we're doing this week, all the same, about reopening your village hall. We're lucky that we've been able to do this because we've received some funding from the Coronavirus Recovery Fund, which is run by Cambridgeshire Community Foundation. We're very grateful to them for that support. And what that's allowing us to do is to think about how else we might support you as you go through these next 12 months. So not only is it about reopening, but it's also thinking about how do you ensure your community knows about your village hall. So we're thinking about perhaps doing some training around marketing. We also know that a sort of perennial problem is you know, trustees get worn out. You know, it's a demanding role. You know, how do you recruit and induct new trustees? And then also thinking more widely about how we begin to encourage people back out into the community again. So thinking about how you might connect with your community, how you might find new hirers, and how we might help you get new people in your community to think about setting up new activities for the way that people are now going to be living their lives. So that's all training that we're thinking about developing, or we're not thinking about, we are developing. And when that's ready to launch to you, we'll set up more sessions like this, potentially even face-to-face sessions, and obviously deliver that to you. And that will all obviously be free for you to attend. The other point I just wanted to remind you about before we finish is Lisa's usual coffee morning programme that she runs throughout the year. Those are, I mean, the feedback we get from trustees is they find them incredibly valuable to get together with other trustees. To, you know, normally in each session there's a little bit of learning around a particular topic, but obviously most important is the opportunity for you to talk to each other, hear from each other, learn about other people's experiences, because we find that is a really valuable tool for trustees. So when we circulate the information from today's session, we'll also circulate a link to the programme of activities, so you can take a look and see if there's anything you'd like to join in. We'd love for you to come and join us on some of those. I think, have I managed to do it? Oh, look at that, 8 o'clock on the dot. So, has anybody else just seen more? I'm not sure if that's questions coming in or just people saying thank you. Oh, thank you. Yeah, if anybody's got any questions, Sue, I think you've got your hand up at Sawston.
Now, I just want to say that as a church hall, although we run for the community and not very much for the church, so we did get a grant last year from South Cambs. We didn't feel guilty about it because we run as a community facility. But thanks to Lisa for her encouragement, because I had emails and telephone conversations with no less than 8 different departments and people, and they all kept saying we couldn't get it, or they thought we ought to but they didn't know how. It went on for about 4 months, and finally they gave us £10,000.
Fantastic. Yeah,
and it was absolutely brilliant, but I was slightly disappointed not to have heard anything from them since, because we're now faced with starting back. Instead of having 16 bookings a week, we're starting with 1, going up to 4, and we're going to run at a colossal loss.
Yeah, well, please do look into that additional restrictions.
So I think I will do, much as morally I feel a bit guilty about it, but I think we're obliged to, because otherwise we'll be losing.
Don't feel guilty. I mean, at the end of the day, particularly if you're charitable, it's about doing the apps. You know, your ultimate responsibility as a charity trustee is about, and same if for a church halls, is about doing the right thing for that building. You know, you're responsible for doing the right thing. So accepting that money that is your due is absolutely the right thing. So yeah, no guilt at all here.
If anybody else is fighting with the council, just keep going, because you'll win in the end.
Thanks, Sue, that's helpful to know. Anybody else? Not sure I can see any hands. I think we're okay. Right, well, thank you ever so much for spending Wednesday evening with us. And hopefully we'll see you all again very soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Best wishes to you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.